There is an abundance of wealth at the NFL quarterback position. If teams aren't elite at QB, there is potentially 7 quarterbacks coming out in the first round, which is why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers simply cannot settle for Baker Mayfield. For Bucs fans, they likely feel Baker was a fine successor to Brady and has been able to provide a smooth enough ride during that transition. However, throughout the previous games in the season, Baker seemed to have a pretty good rhythm, had a ton of comfort in his decision making, was decently mobile, and clearly was a fantastic leader that the team rallied around. However, my concerns come in with watching the tape of that Buffalo game. Baker, later in his career, has become somewhat of a streaky passer, and if he doesn't make a couple of throws in a row, take a 3-step drop and just sling it right out of the hand, then he's going to lose a lot of momentum and a lot of steam. I thought he was extremely passive in that game. I thought that if he didn't start to gather a decent amount of momentum, then the offense was predictable. An improvement from the run by Tampa didn't really help Baker's game in a way that you think it should for someone who was picked first in the NFL draft. And so I think Tampa has to be real with themselves here and say, at least we didn't drive this thing into the tank, and Baker was the right guy for the situation, but ultimately they've got to find the right franchise guy. They simply have never had one in the history of their franchise that they drafted and became great. You let Steve Young walk out the door, Tom Brady brings you a Super Bowl. That's about as good as it's been in the history of the Buccaneers. I'm calling out the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears for simply not knowing who they are or what they want to be. I'm pretty perplexed by the Chase Young and Montez trades. Listen, pass rushers don't grow on trees, especially ones with the physical gifts that both Montez and Chase Young have. To walk away from both of them, I think they should have stuck with Chase Young. It came down to keeping one of the two because I think his upside is much higher. The concern is obviously his injury history. But what I think confuses me with the trade between the Bears and the Commanders, adding a guy like Montez Sweat, who's kind of like the cherry on top for a competing team like the 49ers, like the Eagles, like the Seahawks. All of those teams are viable, and maybe a physical and gifted pass rusher like Montez being added to that lineup might push them over the edge, right, to win the wild card game. I'm saying that Chicago doesn't know who they are because they were considering getting rid of one of the best corners in the league, and then they added a cherry on top guy. Like, Montez isn't going to be your key or your premier pass rusher. I understand Chicago being pretty low in the stats for rushing the passer, but if this is just a short-term, halfway through the season deal, I don't understand why Chicago thinks that this Montez thing is going to provide enough value. Now, on Washington's side, it makes all the sense for the 49ers to go out and get Chase Young. This is what they do. This is their pedigree and their pattern of behavior. We shouldn't have expected anything less. But for Washington to trade Chase to one of the top teams in the same conference as them, it tells me that they are wholly unserious about their identity and how they want this rebuild to look. There's not a ton of Chase Youngs walking around on the street or in college football. So to have one of the highest levels of cap space going into 2024 and then to let both of those pass rushers just walk out the door for next to nothing, confusing. It's telling you that Washington doesn't understand if they're in a rebuild or if they're trying to break in a new quarterback who's going to take them for a playoff run. They hired a coach who has had a lot of success and wants to win now. And I'm not sure that he signed up for a rebuild. I always thought that Washington saw themselves as a few pieces away, and I understand the leadership group coming in, changing, it not being Daniel Snyder anymore. But it sounds like they have all the faith in the world in Sam Howell. He's looked like a version of Baker Mayfield with, more athleticism. But you have dudes who you've re-signed on the long term on the defensive line who have been vocal about how unhappy they are being in Washington. And so now you go and you completely gut the best part of your team. I don't understand how you do a rebuild when you don't have anything to build and hope for in the future. At least you can look at that elite defensive line and say, oh, this is something that we can just continue to iterate on, but you don't strip it to the ground. I mean, this tells me that Washington thinks that they might be, 4 to 5 years away, whereas all of the moves that they've made and the way that they're playing is really not showing that this is a team who thinks that they're on the bottom of the NFC. And so to now trade them to essentially one of the top 2 teams in the conference, you're telling me that you don't think that the Chase Young thing is going to affect you at all in the playoffs. So this is where it's just confusing with these franchises. It's like I made this short about the Las Vegas Raiders. It just feels like there's a perennial list of a bunch of teams who just confuse the shit out of me every single year. And I'm just like, if you don't, as the organization, don't know what you are, your fans don't know what you are, and that just alienates people. The Washington fans have been through enough in the last 30 years. And when you're in a division with Dallas and the Eagles, you can't really sit around and play games like this. Like, you need to let the guys in the locker room know that you are interested in competing in their lifetime, right? Why would anybody want to come on a free agent deal? Why would anyone want to sign a deal on that defensive line knowing that now your 2 best pass rushers who are helping you so much when you're rushing up the middle are now gone? Like, how are you supposed to spin that to the team?